All righty. We're starting to see people populate in. So we'll just get started in a minute. They're slamming through the door.
Traffic jam?
Traffic jam.
Traffic jam to see Alan?
Yeah.
Exciting, yeah. Wow.
Single file line as you come in, please.
Is that
All
a good,
right.
is that a guitar on your lapel?
Oh yeah, it looks like it.
It's a guitar, rock and roll, and then ONR. A little subtle advertising too.
Very
Nice.
nice. Yeah, I got mine here too. So
Yeah. I got I used to wear this. It's an old shirt. We used to have a football team in New England.
Here, yeah.
who do you remember, Alan? Do you watch football?
A little bit, not that much. Probably not as much as you guys, but we like the Dolphins down here.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Well,
They
they're
were,
doing better than we are.
they were decent. They were decent. Not very high expectations, so we're okay.
And then they had to play in the cold and they lost in the playoffs. All
Dolphins
right.
usually
All right,
freeze in the cold, yeah.
Buffalo. Yeah,
Yeah.
Buffalo. Jake,
Okay, everyone. Yeah, so let's get going on the I'm sure we could talk football all day, but or I could at least. But let's get into the program for today. This is the 13th session of the Marcus Hour feature, which has featured Stephen Marcus and myself, Jake Marcus. And technically we said last episode was the 1 year anniversary. That was technically the 12th episode. This, since it's the 13th, is actually the 1 year anniversary of doing the Marcus Hour webinars and podcasts. So this is a exciting feature presentation today. A new era that we talk about, the technology wave, what's changing in communities, and all of that. And what we're going to be discussing today is really implementing electronic voting mainly, as well as virtual meetings and the effect that it has had on community associations.
Jake, you want to say something about CAI?
Oh, of course, yes.
A
And
typical plug.
a typical plug for CAI, Community Associations Institute. That this is the go-to organization for any community associations, whether you're unit owner, board member, property manager, vendor, what have you. Community Associations Institute has been the go-to source. In New England, we deal with Claudette Carini. She is the is it President, Stephen?
Executive director.
Executive director, and yeah, she's
Well,
fantastic.
she's the boss of all of us, so yeah.
Yeah,
Dictator.
right, exactly.
Benevolent dictator.
And we're also involved nationally, as well as CAI Southeast Florida. And yeah, that it's a great organization. If you don't know about CAI, we highly recommend joining. We could probably actually provide whatever guidance that CAI New England or CAI National has on electronic voting right now. But for today's episode, we want to get into guidance for electronic voting and virtual meetings. Alan, and I might butcher your last name, Gushovsky.
Bukowski, pretty close, yeah.
Oh, okay, that wasn't bad. All right. So Alan Gukowski, he will be our special guest today. And he is the founder of ONR, which is a software that does strictly it revolutionizes the community management with electronic voting. And it sets the standard for efficiency and transparency in voting. We'll get into a lot of, what comes with electronic voting, debunk some of the myths about privacy and security, talk about the legislation, and we'll also get into so Alan is mostly in Florida, which has had a enacted statute since 2015 regarding electronic voting. In Massachusetts, there's still pending legislation. There's nothing in the statute or in the Condominium Act about electronic voting. So we're going to kind of use Florida as our kind of guideline. because with a lot of condo and community association issues, if it happens in Florida, it's generally going to make its way up throughout the nation, and that includes New England. And so that's just something that we want to look at as guidance. We'll talk about the bill that's currently in Massachusetts. And yeah, so we'll get into it. So for background, if you don't know already, Stephen and I work at Alcock and Marcus. We represent in Massachusetts and Florida, as well as New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Maine, full service community associations, law firm. Whatever you need, we're here to help, whether it's a unit owner issue, board issue, property managers, whatever you need, we have handled it. So we will be ready to go on that. And yeah, in this Marcus hour, we generally try to provide educational, informational sessions. And yeah, we're a year into this, so it's been fun. So thank you for joining for the 1 year anniversary. And I will share the screen because we're gonna do a PowerPoint presentation. And here we go. So that's all of us. That's Stephen on the left, me on the right, and Alan on the bottom. And we're going to be discussing implementing virtual meetings and electronic voting in your condominiums. So Alan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Anything you'd like to add before we kind of kick it off?
Well, a few things. Number one is just on the CAI thing. We actually met through CAI, so just a heads up. It's a great place to meet other vendors and other peers in the industry as well. Great place and great plug. I'll definitely go for that. As for online voting and more generally Florida, we've been doing this for a while down here. We are in a few states now, but as to your point, we've seen a lot of things happen in Florida first. That just happens to be because there's a lot of associations down here, and online voting became a thing down here prior to COVID and all these special circumstances, because there were a lot of second homes, and it was tough to get people to participate physically in an analog process. Obviously, COVID here, just like everywhere else in the United States, accelerated the need for a lot of these services. And I'm so happy that we're discussing this now in the Northeast with the focus on how we can make the process better there as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. That's a great point. Yeah, and Alan and I, we met, at it was a CAI event. And yeah, fantastic resource, good go-to electronic voting. And yeah, so here's kind of his description, all about O&R.
It's a long one, huh? A little bit of an eyesore there, but you want me to tell them just a quick history, quick story here? Yeah,
that might be best. Go ahead, Al.
I'm not gonna read it line for line. We could be here 20 minutes, but just general story here. So not really a background in property management per se, just a very, very, very active resident in my community. Eventually joined the board. Realized that there were a lot of issues with tools and the experience that residents had for many different things, but specifically voting was nightmare, and it was very impactful for everyone. So we took a stab at online voting. O&R became the first online voting company out of Florida that was not a law firm. And that's the first thing kind of to keep in mind there. As you look at options, there's different ways you could go about this. You could go and hire a law firm to do this for you, meaning they develop the software themselves, or you can work with a law firm that works with other platforms, standalone platforms like O&R, and there's a few other that we'll discuss in a little bit. But generally speaking, you probably want to have software people doing software and lawyers doing lawyer stuff. That's usually the way it works best.
That's a good point. Yeah, I don't know anything about technology, so I'll leave it to the experts to kind of guide that.
So needless to say, after a few years, few rounds, this spreads like wildfire. COVID hits. Obviously, there's a big need for these types of services across the United States. At this point, we service close to 1,000 communities doing online voting and other things as well. Online voting for us means a lot more than probably what you guys are thinking about, which is just once a year or twice a year. Online voting means surveys year round. Online voting means ratings and reviews. It means signing consents. it means really participating year round and making it easy for restaurants to do that. And like I said, it all starts with one use case, which is, hey, let's get the vote in and see where we take it from there.
Yeah, and that's also, I mean, you hit on a couple of really good points. This is not just, as I mentioned, this has been codified in Florida statute since 2015, and there's still legislation out there regarding online voting and virtual meetings. As far as meetings, yeah, it's not just and yeah, again, this was pre-COVID, and has been around for a while, and Massachusetts is kind of behind on the 8 ball. Stephen, you can kind of touch on the current bill and legislation that's out there in the current session of Massachusetts. And I believe it's until July 31st of this year.
Okay, so COVID, in terms of legislative action, sort of slowed down and dramatically in Massachusetts in 2020, where the only issues that the legislature was focusing on were COVID-related health and safety issues and things of that nature during a declaration of an emergency for the state. But even though the state may have come up with some virtual solutions, such as court appearances by Zoom or whatever the courts are using, it never got to the level where they looked at the CAI New England, Massachusetts LAC suggestion, which is the virtual meetings and electronic voting. The for reasons unrelated to whether the bill is good, because it seems like it's a no-brainer for the legislature that this makes sense for community associations, for the same reason it makes sense for the state, is that it was kicked down the road to like mid-April for a committee hearing, at which point we hope that it will be reported out. And at that point, the July 31st date that Jake mentioned, our formal sessions are held for 19 months between July 1st to 19 months after, which is July 3rd. So from January 1st to July 31st, 2024. So it starts in January 1st, 2023. Most of the legislation passed in Massachusetts passes in June or July of the 18th to 19th month. So we're hopeful that it will pass. Our concerns in the meantime, we don't believe that electronic voting or meetings are possible unless an association amends its condominium documents. So we're hopeful the legislature will act. Because of our confidence that the Mass LAC is very strong, it's headed up by Matt Gaines of Marcus Rico, Emmer and Brooks, and Peter Westhaver of Barkin Management. Since we're hopeful that it will pass, we thought it was a good time to talk about what does that mean upon passage. How is it implemented and executed? And as Helen said, Alcock and Marcus will stick to law and let the software and app people deal with that. So we thought it was a good time to tell associations how this works, and at least discuss the products that ONR has, and then see, if you have questions or comments, we'll either get to them during the program or post-program. We'll send out the PowerPoint. The last page gives Alan's email contact information, but next week you'll receive PowerPoint answers to the questions. And if we don't get a question, answer the questions, we'll answer those as well.
Yeah.
And Jake, was there one more thing that you said that you wanted to provide to the attendees?
Yeah, so yeah, feel free to ask any questions in the chat. Any questions that we don't get to during today's session, we can answer via an email that we send out with the presentation, this recording, video. But before we get into it, I know it was just election season. A lot of annual meetings were happening, and something that Stephen touched on. Yeah, Florida, the statute's there. They have an opt-in clause, which is basically you can opt in to vote. You don't have to, or I should say, opt into electronic vote. You don't have to do it electronically. There are still in-person meetings, and we encourage in-person meetings. But just for ease of, and yeah, since COVID happened, it's been a lot more common. I know as in court, it's virtual hearings, virtual depositions, as well as yeah, virtual meetings with our communities. But before we get into it, yeah, I know it's just election season. I do want to launch a poll question, which you should see in a moment. We do kind of want to know what our audience is today, so we're going to ask what state your association or company, if you're a property manager or vendor, is located. We provided the 5 states that we represent in, as well as other. We also want to know, is your association or clients using an electronic format? And our third question, what have you noticed as far as voting in your community? That is, do you use electronic voting? Do you not use electronic voting? Annual meetings, what have you? And what have you noticed as far as community engagement? And if you want to raise your hand, actually, to that last question, how many of you have had issues in your community or communities that you represent reaching a quorum or getting people to participate? And yeah, I can see a lot of hands already being raised. So we're here to help, and this is why electronic voting is kind of it's not a foolproof solution, but it's a way to help. And I think, Alan, you could probably touch on that. What have you noticed as far as community involvement in light of electronic voting?
Sure. So a few things you guys hit on there that I think are relevant, and that is that we don't know what Massachusetts it's going to come out like, but I'm pretty certain it's not going to force anyone to vote online. It will certainly provide, hopefully, the option to do so. And what we've seen, for example, in other states where they've been doing this for a while is there might be, only a handful of people that do it at first, and then the second round, there's more people, and it ends up building out. But there is the concept that you could still have in-person meetings, and the idea is absolutely have those in-person meetings, but have more meetings, because not all of them have to be in person. Not everything is as important as the yearly meeting where you're electing directors or whatever it is. There might be other things you need to be able to tackle. So that's a really important component. The other one that I think it's worth noting and thinking about is that online voting, if you only think about this as the tool to cast the final vote, meaning for an election or a really important thing, change an amendment, then you're kind of missing the whole point, because the idea is to involve the community throughout the decision-making process and have surveys and have ratings and have polls like the one that we're having today, and do all these things so you know in a better light where to take the association. By the time the decision needs to be made, usually people are a lot more aligned. And the challenge is, if you want to do this in an organized way, you're probably going to need a tool that's specialized to help you with all these things. Because if not, it's just going to be a bunch of different tools, and it's going to be really a lot of work on everyone to get these people to engage.
So Alan, what type of surveys have you run into across the country in terms
so let me give you a perfect example. This is one I like to tell a lot of story. Condo, it had 2 pools, and one of the pools, hurricane comes by and does a lot of damage, right? So the insurance is willing to pay for it. And the board decided that it would be a great idea to change that second pool. They already had a pool, so change the second pool to a barbecue area, tennis court area. And they would try to get this vote. It was a material alteration vote. They would try to do the vote. They tried a few times. They could never get enough people to participate. Well, when they actually ran the survey, they realized that more people actually wanted to leave the pool because that pool had sunlight during the afternoon and the other one didn't. People didn't care enough to vote against the project. They didn't care enough to vote for it, and it never passed, and everyone assumed that's what the community wanted, and it wasn't the case. So surveys can be as relevant as that. Surveys can be as irrelevant, or not irrelevant, but less legally important, like what do we want to do for our 4th of July party? Is it a barbecue or is it pizza, right? So that's the kind of thing that we're thinking about. It's constantly gauging your community and being able to do it with the right folks. So owners do owners things, residents do resident things, tenants do tenant things, so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. And um, how are people notified? I'm assuming that if you were doing a survey, it was about the pool and you're in March, you don't want to wait until July until the results come in. I assume that with, and I'm totally ignorant about technology, but I'm assuming with the technology that somehow people get a text or an email or something
Yeah.
to know that the survey is ongoing, but I'm not really sure.
So that's a good point. And it's not text or email, or it's usually or ideally because usually people want to be reminded in different ways. So if you can send them an email, that's great. We all know how tough it is to get people's attention with emails nowadays. We get flooded with emails every day. Having the ability to send out text messages as reminders for things that are important are great. If you actually have an app that's dedicated to this, then you can push notifications. You can have little red things on top of the app. That's usually pretty good at getting people to act. But ideally, what you have to do is make it easy for people to be able to participate. And that is usually by notifying them and setting automatic reminders that will let everyone know that their vote is still open and they haven't cast their vote yet, and will remind them 4, 5, 6, 10 times prior to that vote closing for a few days. And that's how you really drive some of that participation. It's about getting people to engage when the time is right for them.
So how do so I'm an owner in one of these communities. Um, how do I know that there's something going on the on the and I apologize if my questions are
No, they're basic.
like that of a first
They're really
grader.
important. They're really important because you have to come into the door. If not, we can't serve you in the restaurant, right? So the whole idea is you get an email to set up your account, or you get a text message to set up your account. However, the association wants to configure it. You click on the link, you set up your password, and now we have your email, your password, your phone number. You can come in and authenticate yourself. The idea is you come in and you authenticate to make sure that it's the right person that's voting. If you just want to send an email with the results, apparently in Massachusetts, you could do that as well, but you know who the email is coming from. The important thing here is it's not just a public website where anyone can go and cast their vote. There's no point in that. What you want is not an open link. What you want is a link where people can come in and they can cast their vote securely. And something that I think it's important and a lot of people ask about is, well, can you guys guarantee that those notifications are delivered, right? To your point, what if I miss out? What if I don't get that text message or that email? So make sure that you're working with a system that can have those records for the association's perspective. And you can go back and look at the record and say, hold on, the email was delivered and actually it was opened, a few days prior, so we can, prove that there was communication in that delivery. I'm thinking about this from two sides because it's about the resident knowing, but also about the association knowing that the messages were delivered, right? And you're able to track that with the right software.
Yeah. So if there were a challenge in court, which sometimes happens, and
It
probably
happens.
happens more in Florida, there's enough information that you have to show that messages were sent and received.
Yeah, so we've been in business since 2016, to be exact. 2018, very specifically with the software. There's been contested elections because it happens. It's a common process. A few of them have actually gone to court and we've been court subpoenaed. And the amount of information we can provide usually overwhelms the people that are requesting this information, because when you do things online, everything's recorded. Everything is recorded. We can tell you where, who, from what device, what time, what token, what this, what that. And all that information is something you can't do with analog processes. You don't have that type of data to be able to look at. So from the association's perspective, the more people that vote online, the better records that they're going to have and better position they're going to be if anything is contested.
Yeah. And just as a brief aside, not that it's the core topic, but if you have an association with 300 units, I assume with electronic voting, you have less vehicles or even meetings. You have less vehicles. It's good for the environment and all that.
Paper.
And it's easy to do. You don't have to think about, oh, gee, I have to drive over to the clubhouse, or I have to go to this site to attend a meeting.
So that's the thing. That's the thing as well. What we see, to your point, is the people that vote online are not only the people that were voting and participating on paper before. They're also the people that weren't, because they didn't have the time where they couldn't make it. From the environmental perspective and the time management perspective, printing out papers, stuffing envelopes, and emailing them is probably the worst thing you can do. And we've seen associations cut down on that expense tremendously to even offset any cost that online voting might have for them, and in spades.
Right. And I think this is something we discussed before, Alan. It's all, you know, when people think about implementing and in Florida, it's a lot more streamlined with the statute. If you basically mirror the language of the statute, you're good to go. In Massachusetts and the other states we represent, there is no statute. And this slide, we kind of discussed the emergence of electronic voting and virtual meetings. As you can see, in the green states, which includes Florida, which includes actually, it looks like the majority or most of the states compared to the rest, remote meetings are contingent on an association's governing documents, charter, bylaws. If governing documents are silent, the state nonprofit or business corporation act allows remote and virtual meetings. There are also are blue states. It looks like Maine is one state we represent that is blue. A state statute governing community associations allows for remote or virtual meetings. And then there are gray states, which it looks like Massachusetts is the only one. And
Wow.
that is emergency powers enacted by COVID allowed a state of emergency for associations to meet remote or virtually. And then there's a few khaki states we do represent in New Hampshire as well, which is one of them. There are no applicable statutes. Remote meetings are contingent on the Articles of Incorporation, Charter, and bylaws. And now, this is actually a graphic from CAI and National, and I believe Don Bauman runs the CAI National. That's another shout out to CAI. And this is a great kind of feature, just showing, you know, the biggest thing is, in my opinion, a lot of what's happening in Florida ends up spreading throughout the state or throughout the country. Makes its way up the Northeast, makes its way across the country. Any issue, insurance, the reserve study issue that's going on in Florida, structural integrity, and that all kind of stems from the unfortunate Champlain Towers collapse in 2021. But it's no different with online voting and virtual meetings. And this is the future that we, you know, everyone was saying this is the new normal during COVID. This will be the new normal in community associations. And Alan and I were, and Stephen were discussing before this webinar a little bit about, you know, you can try to create the wheel yourself, but we don't recommend it. You may try a Survey Monkey or Google Poll or something like that. And as Alan mentioned, yeah, email right now is fine in Massachusetts for voting. You can send in a vote via email, but it's not allowed in Florida, and it's something that we need to keep in mind moving forward, and why it makes sense to use a software like ONR to kind of ensure that this is properly implemented in your communities. You want to do it right. And what's that, Stephen?
I was gonna say, that, going on to the, you made a statement, and I just want to clarify it, that people can vote by email. In Massachusetts, that would only be if the association has amended their documents, trust the bylaws, to provide for voting by email. The issue is that documents have to be signed in Massachusetts, and therefore that have to be an amendment to say that the email didn't have to be signed. So just clarification on that. On the trends coming from Florida and from California, probably like 25 years ago, it was at the Miami condominium cluster seminar, and one of the speakers said there was 6 bills on bingo and condominiums that particular year. So we sort of look at the trends to predict the future of what's going to happen in New England or the rest of the country. We look typically to Florida and California. Jake, there's a question about what about Rhode Island?
Oh yeah, so Rhode Island on this appears to be a blue state, so a state statute governing community association allows for remote or virtual meetings. So there is something on point there. Yeah, and I kind of wanted to get into some of the poll questions while we have a moment here as well. So it ended up being, yeah, the most, is your association or clients using an electronic format? The majority of you voted no. And as far as what have you noticed as far as voting in your community, the most that we saw is we do not use electronic votings and have issues with voting / community involvement. So yeah, I mean, I think that kind of goes to the core of what we are kind of looking at here, and kind of how we get more people on board with voting.
And one attendee has responded that they've been using a software application. I'm going to mention the name, electionrunner.com, for voting, and has worked nicely to raise percentage of participation and to be able to report out voting results. I'm assuming that ONR has the same capabilities, and my guess is that owner participation rises as electronic voting is permitted.
Sure does. So few individual apps out there that are just for voting. You mentioned one of them. There's a handful out there. First of all, if we want to take a step back, you always have, again, if legislation permits, Florida legislation is a little bit more focused, but if legislation permits, you can kind of build your own app. You can build your own process. You can have, people voting, like you said, by mail if the association allows it, or have a Google form, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, all you're really doing is making it more difficult to whoever's managing this, because they probably already have a lot on their plates to begin with. And having a whole process where they're coming in and they're building it their own is usually not the best way to go. So then you're left with other apps out there that do this specifically. So you'll run into some apps that just do voting, and you'll run into some apps that do voting plus some other things. We happen to do voting plus a lot of things, but it doesn't mean we're not great at online voting itself as well. In terms of pricing, what you can expect, again, you could do it yourself, probably with off-the-shelf tools, but you're usually going to pay somewhere around $600 to $1,000 a year for the association, all in. That's probably what you're going to be paying. Closer to 1,000, you're going to get better features. You're going to get automated reminders. You're going to get text message reminders. You're going to get a good concierge support team helping you set up the vote and set up everything to go. Towards the lower end of that, 500, 600 a year, you'll get a very basic app, probably just a web app that sends emails. Could work as well. There's going to be a little bit more work on your end to set it up and go. But all in all, this is pennies compared to what you're saving. I mean, not only are you saving a bunch on mailouts and direct costs like that, but also the fact that you can get things done. I mean, at the end of the day, let's not lose sight of what we're really trying to do here. What does ONR offer? It's not an online voting platform. That's the shovel. The whole is quorum. The whole is you get participation. You get enough people to do something that is good for the common good of the association. And that's what we're really offering here. We're offering the opportunity for everyone to participate in their own way.
So I'm going to answer it a little differently, because what I got out of the question that was asked was that the person using electionrunner.com says that it's raised participation and report on voting results. But in terms of what software to use, first I'll ask Alan for his website, but then let me take it over from there.
Sure. So
somebody asked your website to know what your website was.
Absolutely. So it's onrapp.com. You can sign up there. There's a whole section on voting. If that's what you want to see, you can see everything else as well. Of course, we'll be sharing a follow-up to this webinar with our contact information, so you can get a hold of us. I think something that's important as well, just to answer very plain and upfront, the reason why you do online voting is to drive more participation, period. That's the driver behind it. And you're going to go, and we've seen some of our communities go to 85, 90, 95% participation. So
you're only supposed to give your web address.
Sorry about that.
And then my comment is my suggestion, because you want unbiased opinions, is for CAI members. And Jake didn't say that it's a international nonprofit, but it is a nonprofit for education and guidance for associations. They have something called the CAI Open Forum, where board members and managers post things. And the beauty of it is you get answers across the United States, and even at this point internationally. So the purpose of today's webinar was to talk about the fact that electronic voting exists. I think, as with anything else, whether it be lawyers or anything else, there are going to be different levels of which application softwares fit your needs. And Alan is touting the benefits of ONR, say, versus a free or very cheap online voting app. But essentially, you have to look at the price. Probably if you're on CAI Open Forum, if you're a member of CAI, that's open to you. Ask people in Florida what their experience with electronic voting has been, and what apps or software they happen to like. Is that fair, Alan?
100% fair. Listen, the biggest thing is anything is better than not doing anything at all, but just beware that there's going to be some tools that they're going to take some more work to manage. And if you have the time and willingness to invest in it, go for it. The one thing that we want is anyone that uses online voting to drive more participation. And that's going to lead to better outcomes. It's going to lead to a better invested community. You have a few options out there, especially if you're in a state where it's a little bit less defined. I think there's a lot more leeway to some of the tools you can use. When you get into some of the states where the legislation is a little bit more mature, and it's been well defined. There's only a handful of players that can comply. For example, down here in Florida, it would be very hard or almost impossible to comply with state legislation and do it yourself, just because the amount of time and investment you would have to put into it is just not worth it, right? Just for one association, I mean. And that's what we're trying to drive here. It's make sure you do something, give your people the ability to vote online, and generally the community is going to be better off.
Yeah,
So somebody asked, but they didn't say what question it is. This person asked, that's a really important question. It would certainly be useful to repeat it again live.
which question?
If the person can tell us what question you're referring to.
They're probably referring to what happens if the residents are not, they don't know how to use tech. Because I answered that one on the chat. So
yeah, I'm not. Yeah, there's a question on using tech, and it would be that you also have to have a method for doing it
on paper.
By paper, old school.
Florida's statute is an opt-in, so you can still vote via paper, attend
Yeah.
meetings in person.
And I would think any legislation,
Yeah, they're not
or
gonna
any
force it.
practical application, by any management condominium manager would be that, of course, if you do not use the technology, we are going to allow old school paper, so that so it's not exclusionary. There was a question, so if the legislation is passed in Massachusetts, then do condominium docs not need to be amended to allow email electronic voting? My hope is, because we don't know what the legislature will do while in session, and but our hope is that the legislation that passes is applicable to any condominium created before, on, or after the effective date of the legislation, so that every association doesn't also have to pass an amendment. So I believe if it passes, one, this question will pass. The second question is, I suspect that will eliminate the need to go through the amendment process. That's the way we've done all legislation that CAI has proposed in Massachusetts from 1991 till today. So I expect the same for the electronic voting. But as Mark Twain said, nobody is safe while the legislature is in session. So we don't know what they'll do with the bill.
Yeah, and something that I wanted to actually ask Alan. Now, yeah, some communities are saying, yeah, they're desperate to find a solution. ONR offers a platform to get more people involved, reach quorums, also encourages more meeting attendance on the issues that are in an agenda or annual meeting or an election. Now, for board members and property managers, what other ways besides, hounding for people to submit votes, what other ways can you kind of encourage quorum or get more people involved? What kind of tactics do you use to kind of reach that which you said? I mean, ONR is the application, and it's the electronic voting software, but the goal is the service of reaching a quorum. What are some ways that you can kind of go about getting more people involved, or what you've noticed as far as getting people to vote?
It's a good question. So let's divide it into, first of all, hounding. It sounds a little harsh, but let's call it a stern or firm reminding is a really important tactic that should be used. Problem is if you have to do it manually. So if you yourself have to sit down every morning and write up an email or send a text to get people to participate, you're wasting your time. So having the ability to set these things to be automated and set these reminders to be automated and only notify the people that haven't voted and really have a system behind you that helps you goes a long way. But on top of that, if you're only using a tool once a year, you can't expect everyone to know and how to use it and want to use it, because it's, how many apps do you have on your phone that you only use once a year? Probably not that many. You either use them every day or you just left them there because you forgot about them. So the reality is, like, we want to get people on the app way ahead of the vote. We want to get people doing surveys. We want to get people doing ratings and reviews. By the time the vote rolls around, they'll know what to do. Even better, you know where they are every day or close to every day? Probably on the Facebook page for the condo, or the WhatsApp group to chat with their neighbors. So if you can get all those features to be part of that same app, when the vote comes out, it's going to be very natural. It's doing another thing, and not going out of your way into a different app. So that would be my advice. Two things. Number one, get automation, get a system that'll work for you with hands-free mode. No one has time to really hound people on this. That's a reality. And number two, try to find a system that gives you more than just once a year, I vote and that's it. And you'll probably get a better traction as well.
I'll give the harshest answer that I've heard over the years, but it seems to be the answer that everybody says for getting people to a meeting. But it has a downside of causing people to be nauseous. Some associations and managers, probably through the advice of some attorney sitting in our ivory towers, told association boards or managers, oh, send out a notice to the unit owners that the board is considering a doubling of the condominium fees. That will get a
That'll sort of drive attendance.
that will get a large participation. I don't want to cause anybody illness because of that approach, but a softer way, as I've been thinking about this, has been if I were a management company or a board, if the cost of this works out to about $10 or less per unit, I mean, it just seems like the 600 to 1,000 or 1,200 is not a massive expense. Getting ahead of the curve, starting with the software to do surveys is certainly permissible. So I know getting the vote to amend the condominium bylaws of trust can be a difficult process, so we'd prefer the legislation. But Alan, I assume there's no problem with people using the software to get the owners used to it.
Sure, absolutely.
By doing surveys, because one of the questions was, I'll just it down to with change come complaints. And somebody in the audience did bring up that issue as to whether initially people are freaked out by the change. What's your experience, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's communities and there's communities, right? I think we all, it would be unfair to say everyone is in the same boat. There's some communities that are going to be a little bit more prone to adopting technology than others. It doesn't really have to do with age demographics. It doesn't have to do with anything else other than where the association is at. So we've seen associations where there's a huge vote participation because there's a controversial subject on the table. Either the board's controversial, or there's, to your point, they're considering raising dues, something that's really driving people to want to participate. And sometimes that same association a year later doesn't have that same participation because everything's settled down. So it's about making sure you're using the tool when you need the tool. And if right now you're trying to change condo docs, if you're trying to do material alterations, if you're trying to do anything that requires a super majority of people to vote, whatever that number is, depending on your state and your rules, you probably want to have to lean on technology to do that. It's going to be very hard to do so otherwise. Generally speaking, we've seen associations that went from having a handful of decisions to many decisions made per year. And another thing to keep in mind is the way that you built this out is what makes sense for the association. So it's not about opening up Pandora's box of complaints and now you're getting flooded with complaints. It's never about that. It's about getting people to vote and cast their vote and do surveys and do things that are relevant for the decision makers like the board members. That would be my position there. I never see technology as a negative thing. I know that some people see it as a challenge. They might be overwhelmed. But again, who are you partnering up with? Who are you bringing to your association? What company are they going to help you or are they not? And if you go cheap, you'll usually find people that won't be able to help you out.
Awesome. Yeah, and we did receive and yeah, that I think our next slide we kind of get into okay, well that's implementing debunking some of the myths on fear of less security and privacy. I think in some regards I've actually heard that electronic voting basically ensures that there is not any, foul play when it comes to voting, rigging, whatever. It now is there some type of stamp or something that ONR has that allows for
Yeah.
to ensure there's only one vote or etc.
Yeah, so but let's take it from top to down. So first of all, nowadays we're doing really important transactions online. People are moving money around, people are signing deeds, they're buying property, they're selling property. All these things are happening online nowadays. So the security now is at the level where we can do things online and guarantee to a certain degree that it's a secure transaction. Now, when you do online vote and people vote online, there's a lot more information that gets generated. What do I mean by that? Well, there's records, who connected, where they connected from, what device they connected from. There's a lot of this information that can be used later. On paper, I'm as you can imagine, I've gone to a lot of yearly meetings in different states, and I always get baffled because we have this, signature, and no one in the room claims to be a signature expert anyway. No one would dare say that signature is not the right signature. I don't think it's the right signature. Yet it's the one thing that we're using to authenticate people or their ballot or whatever it is. It's so much easier to cheat on paper than online. So generally speaking, that's my position. Now, who are you dealing with and what are their security practices? There's good actors, there's bad actors out there, there's good companies, there's bad companies, like anything. So when you are considering this, ask the people that you're going to do business with, what are their security practices? Us at ONR, for example, we have a lot of security checkpoints to make sure that only the right people vote, only the right people vote once, there's no duplicate votes, but I can't speak to every single player in the market. What I can tell you is you're going to be, generally speaking, better off with online voting than not if you want to defend the position of the association later.
Excellent. And yeah, we also received a question, a clause in the governing documents, and this is a Massachusetts condominium. A clause reads, "There shall be an annual meeting of the unit owners on the second Tuesday in March of each year at 7:30 in the city of Taunton or at such reasonable place and time as may be designated by the trustees by written notice." Now it states, do you need to amend before moving forward with e-voting? And I think in this situation, the election, you can hold a election without an annual meeting, and you can have an annual meeting without an election as well. And in this case, we need to see the full governing documents. But my position would be, well, you would need to amend to allow for voting, e-voting. And then you can move forward with that at your leisure. But it's separate. It would be separate from the annual meeting, assuming what I'm reading is accurate.
I think that the attorney who wrote that should call me on my cell 781-413-5226 because we need a little more information on that.
Yeah.
But a lot of times in Massachusetts, the election does happen at the annual meeting. Uh,
Generally.
excuse me?
Generally,
Yeah, generally.
but it's not
So
required. It's not required.
there's nothing talking about it in the condominium act, so the documents don't have to say that. The safest answer to the question is that an amendment, short of legislation, an amendment to the bylaws of trust would be the safest way of guaranteeing that you could do things virtually or electronic voting. There may be some associations where there's no controversy in terms of the election. And I know there have been cases where, with discussions with the attorney, the business risks are weighed of, gee, if we do this, even though our documents don't really say it, is there a likelihood that it's going to be challenged? And if the answer is, gee, we can hardly find people to run for the board, there are going to be two people running for two seats. I think it would be safe to say in that circumstance that you probably could do it remotely, but otherwise you should amend or see what happens by the end of July to see if this legislation passes in formal session. But Jake's right. The documents, the Condominium Act of Massachusetts does not require that the elections only take place at a meeting.
And that's the same in Florida as well. You can have one without the other. But yeah, if your governing documents specify, then yeah, it might be a different situation.
Somebody asked if you can vote by unanimous vote of the board. There's a risk to that, and the safest way is to do it by an amendment voted on by the unit owners. But again, you can make the business risk, make the business decision to say, well, the board unanimously voted on it and there's nothing controversial in terms of the election coming up. That's something you should discuss with your manager and your attorney.
Great. So yeah, we're approaching the end of the session. Just kind of going through some of the questions that we're getting. If you have any other, we did get a question. It's regarding a Rhode Island property, and just as a disclaimer, none of us on this on the panel right now practice in Rhode Island. Our law partner Ed Alcock, he is a Rhode Island attorney. Our condo documents state that the annual meeting will be held in person. Can the meeting be held via Zoom instead of in person? As far as the states that we represent, this would need to be, it can still occur via Zoom if there is a amendment stating as such. If in the last question it states there shall be an annual meeting at 7:30 in the city of Taunton, or at such reasonable other place. Now, if the governing document said something along the lines of, the meeting must occur on, and some of them are so specific. It's kind of needs an amendment and is usually open to be amended or open to interpretation. I've seen some governing documents that state, oh, that must occur on the third Tuesday of March in the clubhouse. And that is super specific, and that would kind of, in my opinion, would disallow for an annual meeting via Zoom. What do you think on that, Stephen? It's or Alan as well.
In most of the documents I read, votes are usually have to occur at meetings. So delving again further into this, the declaration of condominium or the bylaws for the particular association in Rhode Island, I think would reveal whether your suggestion is permissible or not. But if votes have to be at meetings and meetings have to be at a place, and in person or by proxy, then I think the only way of voting is by in person or by proxy. Is that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, proxies usually that's kind of a I guess the original informal way of voting remotely. And now yeah, now we have these applications and yeah, I mean I've met Alan a couple times at various events and I trust what they're doing in Florida, and I trust that in Florida what happens in Florida does not stay in Florida. It ends up
Yeah.
making its way up the coast throughout the nation. And this is no different with electronic voting. We're seeing so much evolve, especially since COVID. I mean, yeah, usually I think these type of seminars would just be in person, um, and there's so much good that has come with the emergence of tech, virtual, and all that comes with that. And yeah, we're even able to host these webinars across the nation, across the internationally as well. I don't know if we have any people from Europe or what have you. We'd love to hear. I don't think there were some other votes on the where are you voting from question. So or where are you attending from? Where do you manage? And so maybe there are people in Australia who are attending today, but the point is there's been a lot of more capabilities with online voting and virtual meetings, and ONR, we have Alan's information here, co-founder of ONR. Check out the site. If you have specific questions relating to your association, they have seen the future in Florida, and it's evolving. And yeah, if you're in Florida and you don't use it, he's the resource to go to. If you're in Massachusetts or a different New England state that we represent, we're happy to answer any specific questions to implementing or amending the governing documents and ensuring that we do this the right way. Because yeah, it's important to get people on board, but you want to make sure you do it right. You can try to do it yourself, but that can open yourself up to a lot of potentially some issues with conducting and controlling the votes. So anything else you want to add, Alan? And we appreciate you joining us today.
Well, gentlemen, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Congratulations and honored to be the 1 year anniversary here. Hopefully I can come back for the 2nd year anniversary if you guys will
Yeah.
have me or before. It's been great. For those of you that have questions on online voting in general, feel free to reach out. We can help you. We can definitely, collaborate with Jake and Stephen here and provide you guys the best answer we can for wherever you guys are connecting from. And again, gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thank you. And on that note, yeah, I mean, we just got a message, dear Massachusetts, get with the program. So hopefully by next year we're more with the program in all states. And ONR is growing nationally. So
And we apologize that our answers as it relates to New England are very vague and uncertain. I know that y'all attended the program and everybody wants to hear yes or no, we can do this or we can't do this. When we're near the end of the legislative session, as I said, I have full confidence in Matt Gaines and Peter Westhaver, the co-chairs of the Massachusetts Legislative Action Committee, but they're at the mercy of the legislature. I think the legislation will pass, and if it passes, then it's very easy to regroup, do a follow-up to this webinar, or at least to notify all attendees by email, and then we would have specifics, but it's always anybody's guess as to what the legislature in Massachusetts or any other state might do with our bill before it actually passes it. So I apologize for that. If we were in Florida, it seems like we would have 9 years worth of history. So they're far ahead of the curve and we're behind the curve. So stay tuned.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Al.
Thanks,
Okay.
guys.
Oh, one more thing. Is there a bill number for the proposed Massachusetts legislation? What is the number again, Stephen? It's
Was it 1338?
yeah, I think you're right. 1338, HB 1338.
Yeah, House Bill 1338.
Yep. All right.
And I hope that after April 18th, when the committee hopefully reports it out of committee, we'll be sending you something to call your representative and senators in your town, city or town. And we will certainly send to all attendees notice if the bill passes, or if the bill gets out of committee, in terms of pushing your specific state reps and senators to vote yes on the bill.
And just as a final parting note, if you have any feedback, feel free to email us. Our emails are right there. And any suggested, seminars that we should hold in the future. And we look forward to hearing from you and getting any negative, positive feedback, whatever you have, we're happy to hear it.
Jake, we've captured all the chat Q and A, all the questions, so that post program next week, people will get the PowerPoint, as well as answers to the questions and answers in both Q and A and chat.
That's correct, sir.
Thank you, sir. And for those in Massachusetts, maybe we'll add to it a copy of the proposed legislation for Massachusetts. And I thought there was one other thing that Alan wanted us to include in that package that he thought might be helpful. So Jake and Alan will discuss that post program, and hopefully you'll receive something from us probably by the middle of next week.
Yep. So
Thank you.
Keep an eye out for that. And yeah, I mean, we could have done a seminar on Florida statute alone, on Massachusetts House bill alone. But we appreciate you coming today and hope it was useful. So have
Thanks,
a good
guys.
Friday, good weekend, everyone. And thank you, Alan, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Take care. Bye-bye.
All righty. Thanks, everyone. How do I stop it again?
There are 6 people still on, but the seminar has concluded.
Yeah. I'm having a hard time figuring out how to stop it.
Okay. There should be a end for all, something like that.
No.
If you leave the meeting, the meeting will be cut off. So do that. All right, I can hit end webinar for all.